Reading through the Bible in a year, January 24th, Genesis 25, Matthew 24, Esther chapter 1, and Acts 24. Now Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore to him Zimron, and Jokshan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan became the father of Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, Letushim, and Leumim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abida, and Eldaah. All these were born to Keturah. Now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and sent them away from his son Isaac eastward, to the land of the east. These were all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a ripe old age, an old man and satisfied with life. And he was gathered to his people. Then his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, and in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, facing Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. It came about after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived by Beer Lahai Roi. Now these are the records of the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names, in the order of their birth: Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, and Abdil, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, and Hadad, and Tema, and Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael, and their names, by their villages and by their camps, 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt, as one goes toward Assyria, and he settled in defiance of all his relatives. Now, these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. Isaac prayed to Yahweh on behalf of his wife, because she was barren, and Yahweh answered him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her. And she said, "If it is so, then why am I this way?" So she went to inquire of Yahweh. And Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. Making sure we don't lose notes here. Continuing on. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came forth red, all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. Afterward his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when he gave birth to them. Now, Jacob means one who takes by the heel or supplants, also trickster. This is important, it comes up later. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now, Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished." Therefore, his name was called Edom, meaning red stuff? Oh, red. But Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "Behold, I'm about to die. So of what use then is the birthright to me?" And Jacob said, "First, swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. That's important. It comes up later. Moving on now to Matthew 24. Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. Basically, look at how beautiful this is. Look at these giant stones and so forth. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." As he was sitting, they're thinking he's talking like, kind of metaphysically, right? They're going to tear down the system of the city. No, he's literally talking about the destruction of the city itself. And he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, and his disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" They asked 3 things. When will these things happen? That's the first. What will be the sign of your coming? That's the second. And third, tell us about the end of the age. And Jesus answered and said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will mislead many. And you'll be hearing of wars and rumors of war. See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. Then they will deliver you to tribulation, and will kill you. And you will be hated by all the nations because of my name. At that time many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many, but because lawlessness is increased, that most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." Again, notes here that help you to understand some of this. "Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get things out that are in the house. Whoever's in the field must not turn back to get his cloak." Basically saying, when you see it, run. Just get out. "But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, because it would be hard for them to run because they have children to take care of. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, 'Behold, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance. So if they say to you, 'Behold, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. Or 'Behold, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be." Basically, it'll be big, and you won't miss it. "Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." But immediately, after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. He will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the 4 winds and from one end of the sky to the other. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. We're going to pause here for a quick second and read the note on this, because lots of people have gotten very confused on this. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up from the... It's very long, but I'm going to read the ESV study notes on this because they're fantastic. All right. Once again, the center notes are from a more Reformed perspective. The side notes from the ESV Study Bible, they give you more detail and kind of a wider view of the things that we're reading in it. Let's begin. So this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. That's the text we're addressing. Several interpretations have been offered for this difficult passage. First, some think this generation refers to the disciples who were alive when Jesus was speaking. And quote, all these things refers to the beginning, but not the completion of the sufferings described in verses 4 through 25 that we just read. Others see in, this is the second option, all these things, a prediction with multiple fulfillments, so that Jesus' disciples will be both this generation that sees the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and also those at the end of the age who see the events surrounding the abomination of desolation, spoken of in verse 15. Third, since the generation of, in the Old Testament, can mean people who have a certain quality, for instance, Psalm 14:5, 24:6, others understand this generation to either refer to A, this generation of believers, so the entire present age, the church age, really, or B, to this evil generation that will remain until Christ returns to establish his kingdom. Fourth, others, particularly of some dispensational interpreters, understand generation to mean race. This is another sense of the Greek genea, from which generation comes, and think that it refers to the Jewish people who will not pass away until Christ returns. The fifth option, others understand that this generation, or understand this generation to mean the generation that sees, quote, all these things, namely, the generation alive when the final period of Great Tribulation begins. According to this interpretation, or this view, the illustration of the fig tree shows that when the final events begin, Christ will come soon. Just as, quote, all these things in verse 33 refers to the events leading up to, but not including Christ's return, so, in verse 34, all these things refers to the same events. So again, that's 5 different overall views that you can take to read this and understand it. Again, it's entirely up to you for your interpretation on it. Obviously, one is true, but as it comes to everything related to eschatology, which is the study of the end times, I agree with my brother Paul Washer, who says that he's not going to spend time in Scripture trying to exact out the exact moment of Christ's return and laying all those things out. He just wants to be found doing the work of God when he comes. And I think that's an excellent point, because God will work these things out on his own. It's our job to be mindful of them, to watch for them because they will come, but also to understand that our job is to serve him. And that's it. Verse 35. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day and hour, no one knows. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Again, there's a note on this specifically about the, no one knows. Not even the Son, but only the Father. Now, there's a good note on this section that kind of helps to explain that. I'm going to make sure you have that available to you. I'm going to continue on reading in verse 37. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came, and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then there will be 2 men in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, and one will be taken and one will be left. Now, typically in the other gospel accounts, at this section here, after he speaks about those who are taken and those who are left, that is where this previous line, verse 28, comes in, where the corpses, there the vultures will gather. And the common reading of that is that, well, the disciples ask, "Where, Lord? Where will the people be taken?" And Jesus' response is, "Where the corpse is, there the vultures will gather," saying they will be taken away and destroyed. Right? And the ones who were taken, again, many dispensational people will read this and they'll tell you, or many people who have dispensational eschatology will tell you that, well, this is talking about the people who will be taken away. If you've ever read the Tim LaHaye books, the Left Behind series, or watched the kind of terrible movies, you'll have seen that, well, those who are secreted away in the night, those are the Christians, the good people, to leave all of the horrible, wicked people here on the earth. But Scripture doesn't speak of it that way. He speaks of those who are taken are the wicked of the earth. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. It's not likely that God's going to take his elect and kill them and have the birds eat them if he's plucking them off the earth. Verse 42, "Therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have been on alert and would have not allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. Who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly, I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, 'My master is not coming for a long time,' begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour which he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Moving on now to Esther chapter 1. Let's read the introduction. Yep, have to go to the right book. The book of Esther never mentions God's name. It's a neat fact. Yet God clearly orchestrated all of its events. Esther, a Jew living among the exiles in Persia, became queen of the empire about 480 BC. Haman, depending on your reading, a Persian official, sought to eradicate the Jewish minority, but God had prepared Esther, quote, "for such a time as this," unquote, to save his covenant people. This book was written some decades later to document the origins of the Jewish observance of Purim, which celebrates Israel's survival and God's faithfulness. The author is unknown, but some believe it could have been written by Esther's cousin Mordecai, who is a key person in this book. Throughout the book, we see God's sovereign hand preserving his people, showing that everything is under his control. Begin. Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days, King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his provinces, being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. This party went on for 6 months. When these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords of fine purple linen, on silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful, according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion. For so the king had given orders to each official of his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he was hammered, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zathar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. Now there's no statement as to why it is that she acts in this way. We just know that she does so. Continuing on. So the king asked her to come, wear the crown, and show yourself off to the people. That's all we know. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Well, then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. And the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for it was the custom of the king so to speak before all who knew the law and justice, and were close to him, Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Media and Persia who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? In the presence of the kings and princes, Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands, by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought into his presence, but she did not come. This day, the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's conduct, will speak in the same way to all in the king's provinces, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. If it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written in the laws of Media and Persia, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her position, her royal position, to another who is more worthy than she. And the king's edict, which he will make, is heard throughout all his kingdom, great as it is. Then all women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. This word pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. So he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to its script, and to every people according to their language, that every man should be the master of his own house, and the one who speaks in the language of his own people. Concluding today in Acts 24. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders, and an attorney named Tertullus, or an expert in the law, and they brought charges to the governor against Paul. After Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying to the governor, Since we have through you attained much peace, and since by your province reforms are being carried out for this nation, we acknowledge this in every way and everywhere, most excellent Felix, with all thankfulness. But that I may not weary you any further, I beg you to grant us, by your kindness, a brief hearing. For we have found this man a real pest, and a fellow who stirs up dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Now, halfway through this next verse, we reach another bracketed section. This one actually goes between multiple verses, starts halfway through verse 6 and ends in the beginning of verse 8. Why does it skip over multiple verses? Remember that the numbers that were added to verses weren't added until much, much later. And when it was added, this text was already present in the majority text. Remember, majority text not meaning the best or the most accurate or the one that everybody understood was the best text to use, but the majority text largely is just the one that they had the most copies of. In the same way, if I bought for my church a handful of Bibles, let's say I went and bought 100 Bibles, and that one that I bought happened to have a misspelling in it somewhere, and yet I had one copy that didn't have the misspelling, the majority of the text would have the misspelling, but that doesn't mean that that's the better copy. So, once again, as I mentioned before, the bracketed text that we see here does not exist in the oldest and therefore closest to the original manuscripts that we have available. So it was only added afterward. All right? Following here. So, once again, I'm going to start by reading verse 6, which has that disputed text in it. And then I'll read through the disputed text, which is half of verse 6, all of verse 7, and half of verse 8. And I'll read through all of verse 8. Then I'm going to roll back and start back at verse 6, skip the disputed text, and keep reading through the end of verse 8, and I'll keep reading through. Let's begin. In fact, I'm going to roll back to 5 a little bit because it reads through the whole theme. So let's begin. We have found this man a real pest, and a fellow who stirs up dissension among all Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. We wanted to judge him according to our own law, but Lysias, the commander, came along, and with much violence took him out of our hands, according his accusers to come before you. By examining him yourself concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things of which we accuse him. Back to verse 5, removing the disputed text. For we have found this man a real pest, and a fellow who stirs up dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. By examining him yourself concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things of which we accuse him. The Jews also joined in the attack, asserting that these things were so. When the governor had nodded for him to speak, Paul responded, knowing that for many years you have been a judge to this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. Since you can take note of the fact that no more than 12 days ago I went up to Jerusalem to worship. Neither in the temple, nor in the synagogues, nor in the city itself did they find me carrying on a discussion with anyone or causing a riot. Nor can they prove to you the charges with which they now accuse me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way, again, the name for the Christian faith, which they call a sect, they call it the sect of the Nazarenes, I do serve the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men cherish themselves, that there shall certainly be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. In view of this, I also do my best to maintain always a blameless conscience before both God and before men. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings, in which they found me occupied in the temple. having been purified, without any crowd or uproar. But there were some Jews from Asia who ought to have been present before you to make an accusation, if they should have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves tell what misdeed they found when I stood before the council. Other than for this one statement, which I shouted out while standing among them, for the resurrection of the dead, I am on trial before you today. But Felix, having a more exact knowledge about the way, so he understood Christianity and what's going on with it, he put them off, saying, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will decide your case. Then he gave orders to the centurion for him, Paul, to be kept in custody, and yet have some freedom, and not to prevent any of his friends from ministering to him. Again, this was a common thing. When you went to prison, they didn't have books, they didn't have TV, they didn't have things to keep you occupied in your time. You barely got food. Typically, they wouldn't give you clothing to take care of yourself. Why should they? You're the one who violated the law. Therefore, that's why you're being kept in prison. So it was the responsibility of the people to then go and take care of the needs of those who are in prison. This is why prison ministry is brought up in the New Testament, because you're supposed to remember those who are in prison, not just regular people who are in prison, but specifically those who are in prison who are Christians. So they would go to these prisons and they would take care of their needs. They would bring them food. They would bring them clean water. They would bring them clothing. They would bring them, in Paul's case, certainly parchment and pen, so he could write letters to people. And then they would take those letters and mail them off to where they needed to go. They were taking care of his needs for him. And that's what these New Testament prison ministries were really about. It's about taking care of the needs of the people, specifically of the Christians who are being persecuted for the name of Christ. Continuing on. Verse 24. But some days later, Felix arrived with Drusilla, his wife, who was a Jewess, and sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. But as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and said, go away for the present. When I find time, I will summon you. At the same time, too, he was hoping that money would be given him by Paul. Therefore, he used to send for him quite often and converse with him. But after 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul imprisoned. That's it. That's all the reading and all of the notes for today. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow. Behold, the word of the Lord.